All right, welcome everybody. Today is day 2 for a study group. We're going to be focusing on data for AI on day 2. And then we're going to do an interactive quiz. We're going to add a third day because ethical considerations need a little more time for us to really get into it and really understand it. And it's probably one of the most important things, right? Making sure that we're using AI in the proper way and that we're thinking about things before we implement it. And that way we don't get caught by mistakes or anything else like that. That's going to be this Friday. I'm traveling next weekend, so I can't do it on Saturday, and we'll talk about the time in a little bit. I definitely want to reinforce it's a study group. I am learning with you guys, and I am learning a lot more than I had expected. I thought I knew more than I do, and it's really fun to go through these. Please ask your questions, give us your examples. I think the discussion we had last week was really valuable, and I love hearing your experiences, your input, and your questions. If you have a question, somebody else probably has the same question. All right, data for AI. So one of the big parts of the uh, trail mix was getting your data literacy up, right? Understanding what data is about. You want to make sure that you have the skills and the tools to be able to explore the data. Are you asking the right questions? Are you looking at the data in the right way? Do you know how to examine the data and dig deeper into asking specific questions? Being open to make sure that what you understand, what you get out of it, is meaningful to you. So you want to make sure you're understanding what you're getting out of it and that you're able to see what it means and how you could use it. Also, that you're not skewing it for any particular way. Maybe taking a data sample that's too small, a time frame that's too small, or just certain attributes that might make the data seem to give you something different that it actually does. We're also going to talk about what kind of data we get. Is it qualitative or quantitative? Is it how we can use that? And what I thought was really interesting about this is I could start to see how if you have really good data, it's going to help your AI in the future or really any other process you have. Also communicating your data, making sure you're able to present things effectively to stakeholders. I didn't go too deep into this. Some of these things I breezed through, but I wanted to get into some of the more complex things together as well. So this is making sure that we know our data. Personally, I've never done a whole lot of training with Salesforce Tableau or Salesforce CRM analytics. And so some of the modules for this week were really about that, but I think they're very useful anyway, because they will apply whether you're using those tools or not. You are using some business intelligence tool that makes sense to have these fundamental pieces of information. I am very data driven personally. So for me, this is very natural that when you're making decisions, you're looking at the information in front of you, you're understanding what it means, and then you're making a step forward. So definitely for our bots who aren't human, right? We think of them as human or having human qualities, but they're not. They're only going to be able to act on the data that you give them. So you want to make sure that that data is strong and that you're moving from that instead of maybe your preference, your intuition, your experience, because there's a lot more than the world that we could ever possibly experience as individuals. All right, so let's talk about analytic types by complexity. Himashri, did you want to cover it?
Sure. So we have different data analytics type, and each type provides insight from a different perspective. Let's go from left to right. So descriptive data analysis, it's a foundation of data analysis. It has been here forever. It involves summarizing and interpreting historical data to understand trends and patterns. One thing to remember is it helps to answer the question, what happened? Then you will see that how each one of these answer different questions. One familiar example which most of us have seen is we have this lot of business transactions and we measure KPIs and matrices, and then we bring reports and so on, which helps to improve business operations. So that's an example of that. Some of the key tools and methods which we have used forever, again, mean, median, mode, their central tendency, range, variance, standard deviation. This is used to measure the spread of data. And then some of the visualization tools like histogram, pie charts, line chart, scatter plots, and so on. Usually they're part of descriptive data analysis. I would say the aggregate functions, including percentage and sum and so on, they are part of descriptive data analysis. Um, so one thing is that's not predicting anything; it is just reporting what's going on, and it's focused on historical data. The next one is diagnostic analytics. So the first one, descriptive answer the question what happened, while diagnostic analytics answer the question why did it happen. So it goes beyond what happened. So it does this by identifying the causes, look at the patterns, and also correlate different data to see if something stand out. Um, so nowadays we have so many matrices, sometimes hundreds, and so what it does it review those logs and maybe if you're capturing in database those matrices, correlate multiple KPIs, and then give certain suggestions or a recommendation to identify potential issues, or someone who works in sales and other places, it could be opportunities. So you can think of it if you combine with rules, it's a set of action which can help us to understand why something happened. So the word here to remember is why. So why for diagnostic and what happened for descriptive. So next one is predictive. So predictive analytics, it answers the question, what for the future, what is likely to happen in future based on the two things which we have learned. It uses historical data, statistical models, and machine learning to forecast future trends and outcome. We discussed neural network last week, and some of the other common, and there are more methods to use predictive analytics include regression and decision trees. The next one is the prescriptive analytics. So this answers the question, what should be done? So it's basically what are the action items and what you can do. So it goes beyond what happened, which is descriptive, and why it happened, which is diagnostic, and what is likely to happen in future, which is predictive. So basically, it's a actionable recommendation. It combines all of the previous, which is AI, machine learning, optimization algorithms, and business tool to suggest future course of action items. Uh, next one, next slide. Marlene.
Sorry, I was having an issue with my dog. So there you go.
Okay,
Thank you.
no worries.
Thank you. And before I go to the next slide, just really quick, what I think was really interesting, my button is hidden. Okay. What I think was really interesting about those pieces, I really want to go to the prior slide. There it goes. I hadn't thought about how these really build on each other, right? You can't do diagnostic unless you've summarized the historical data because you need that information to see maybe what the reasons were for it. And predictive build on that because if you know how likely something's to happen, then you can say, it's going to rain today, it's going to rain tomorrow. Like whether people are looking a lot of that data to figure what's going on. And prescriptive is the most complicated one because it needs a little of everything. It needs to know, summarize not just maybe what you're trying to sell, but the customer you're selling it to. Has a customer, like for my industry, are they traveling for leisure and they need a car seat because they've gotten in the past? But this one's actually a business trip, so we're not going to offer it, right? So I thought it was really interesting how they're all connected. And again, I hadn't thought about it that way until I saw the content, but it made a lot of sense. Do you guys have any questions or comments?
The same as when you were speaking about it, we kind of take descriptive for granted because we got the data, but when you were talking about predictive and prescriptive, my head went to it's only going to be as good as the other data that you bring into it, right? Because if you don't have good predictive uh, model for what you're looking for to predict, right? Because it's a prediction, but it's based on your business rules on what is it that you're trying to accomplish. and even further with prescriptive, because you could try to predict, but let's say, you might need to bring an additional information from a different source just to account for inflation or for market conditions or stuff like that. So now your data model is so much more complex, and I guess we're not normally used to thinking of that, because we think about, this is the data I have right now, this is the data I'm going to use. But for predictive and prescriptive, you probably need to bring outside data into this, and then that brings complications and other considerations that I'm not even aware of.
Yeah, awesome. Anybody else? Does anybody have questions or any comments as well? All right. So next slide. So let's talk about what makes good data, because Gil, you kind of prepped us into that, right? Without good data, great job. Without good data, you can't really do a whole lot with it. And so when you're thinking about artificial intelligence, right, 10 records is not enough. 3 web pages is not enough. So volume is a big deal. You need high volume and hopefully historical, that you're looking at not just a week or a month, but multiple years, because hey, how much did COVID change our lives, right? COVID is hopefully a once in a lifetime event, and that skewed so many things. So historical is very important, and also knowing if you need to remove some of that data because it's an outlier. Being consistent with your data. I love our data when it says the data is for CA. What do you guys think CA means as a location?
California?
Yeah. Anybody else?
Canada.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in our data, I was looking at it yesterday, we use CA for both, for California and for Canada. And so being consistent in how you present your data is important. Sometimes codes are definitely going to affect you because they can mean different things. You want to make sure that you have as much variety in it as possible. It can't all be from one product type, because maybe you want to analyze across the whole program, not just one product. Atomic to me is really interesting, because atomic means that your record needs to be able to stand alone. If you only have a full address for a customer, but nothing else tying that to the customer, you just know that a customer lives in that area. And maybe you're looking at something really that high level, but odds are you're not. And so you want to make sure that your records make sense as a unit. And that's what atomic goes for. Obviously, you want to make things that are clear. Otherwise, people are not going to understand it. You want to be able to have, and we'll talk about dimensions in a little bit, about how dimensions affect your data. And you want it to have it structured, because that will also speed up your AI, because you've already done some pre-processing. It's going to make it more useful for the information. You want to make sure it's segmented for the same reason, because that way you can split that leisure and business trip. And that way you know when to apply your data to certain situations. And I thought of known um, pedigree was a funny way to say it, right? Basically, you need to know that your source is a valid source and that it's going to come from the right place. And so let's see, I have a couple of things that I think are a little bit more complex. And so, like I said, consistency. Also, Gil, you mentioned currency, inflation. And so if you charge $10 worth of something 5 years ago, is that $10 worth the same thing today? It is not. And so you also want to make sure when you're looking at the data, you don't just say, oh, it costs $10. Well, no, it needs to be adjusted for how you're looking at it.
And in your
Again,
example of the car seat, I went to, well, if you know the age of the kid that was traveling and you're doing this analysis 5 years or 10 years later,
yeah.
kid no longer needs a car seat. So again, it's just accounting for stuff that you normally wouldn't think of. But when you're trying to apply this to that prescriptive and predictive and prescriptive model, then you got to expand the way you look at things in a way that it's not, I guess it's not the normal way of thinking, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then clear, I forgot I had this example. I was at a workshop last week and people kept talking about CCM, CCM this, CCM that. And because of the type of workshop we were in, I did a quick search for it, and it said customer communication management. And it also made sense as a term. The more we talked about it, oh, wait, no, it's not customer communication management. It's confirm, cancel, and modify. And so be careful with acronyms, both that are specific to your industry, specific to Salesforce, right? Because we are so up to our eyeballs in Salesforce. Try to use the long word. That way, like instead of BI, it's business intelligence, which I did that earlier on purpose because people may not know what a BI tool is. or it might mean something different to them. So being clear definitely helps a lot. And like I said, making sure that your data has both the qualitative attributes, and we'll talk about what those are in a little bit, and quantitative, right? Because both of those will feed into letting you make things segmented and take different actions on different data. So does anybody have any questions or any other examples you want to share on this one? All right, let's keep going. Maybe. There we go. So let's talk about variables and field types. I thought it was interesting the way that the trailheads divided this because it's one and the same. A qualitative variable is a qualitative field. So I don't know why they split it, but they did. And so there are different kinds of qualitative variables. And so there is a nominal qualitative variable, which is basically a name or a noun. These cannot be ranked. So if you're talking about states or dog breeds, you might have an internal bias or preference as to what state you prefer, what dog you prefer, but that doesn't mean that that actual attribute can really be ranked outside of that. You need another set of data to say, oh, you can rank the states by population, whatever other thing you're looking at. And then you have qualitative ordinal variables that you can sort because they are in a way that whether it's you can convert from extremely satisfied to extremely dissatisfied in a 5-point scale. You can still rank those. You can do thumbs up, thumbs down. That's pretty easy, ones and zeros. Even a dog sizes can be mini, standard, giant. And so you can order those. Some of these are numerical ordinal values, and some of them are words. But when it comes to, again, AI, it understands the difference. But the ordinal qualitative variables can be used to categorize or segment your data. So they're extremely useful. Quantitative are going to be of two kinds. They're either discrete, so you can count them as distinct, or separate things. So we have 14 people in this class today. Last week we had 13 people in the class today. So it's we can count the individual people, and we can say on this date this happened, on that date that happened. And so you can count them. But then you have continuous values, which are a little bit more challenging, right? You have people's heights. You have the volume of water the volume of water in like the ocean or lake or something like that. And so these are a little bit more challenging. And I need to move my because they're going to be calculated in portions, but they can also still be aggregated, right? Because you can still find a meaning to some of those kind of things, and that's true for both discrete and continuous. Do you guys have questions about these variables? Because they're really important about how we start to look at data for AI and how we're looking, how we structure our data, or any comments as well, examples. I promise there's questions about this one, so if you got it, I expect everybody to get them right.
Sorry, I have one question.
Yeah.
So these variables, like from Salesforce point of view, or is it an external database?
This is going to be anything data analytics related. And so this one is not Salesforce specific.
Okay, in general. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Good question. Yeah.
I have a question too. Have any of you taken this type of information and brought it into your thinking when designing your databases or tables, or if you're adding fields? Has that already happened, or is that like future consideration?
Anybody have any comments or responses to that?
I was gonna say, and again, I'm no expert by no means, but I used to work at an implementation partner, and David, that was a topic a lot of times when we were talking about data and the right data model and data cloud or not data cloud. It's exactly that. And then a lot of times when you go back to the customer and you tell them that, then they go blank because they really haven't thought about it. So they are now trying to do some sort of predictive or prescriptive project, but they don't have the data sources. And then they come to you as the implementation partner and say, what do you suggest? Well, now we need to spend 3 months understanding your business model and do a deep dive research on your company in order to tell you exactly what to do. And then I read an article last week about data cloud, and somebody posted that that's why data cloud makes it easier because everything is in data cloud, and data cloud itself provides some of that structure and some of that alignment of the data, right? And again, that's not my area of expertise, but I'm telling you from a sales perspective what I've experienced.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Because I'm just thinking about right now I work at a company and we're implementing Salesforce and we're having challenges with the data model because it's wacky. Like I work in real estate, so all of the agent and broker relationships and the values and so forth. I'm just curious if that has been a consideration in the past or if AI is making people starting to think this way because I know our data isn't clean and it's going to be my task to start to clean up the data and that's why this is so useful and I'm just trying to get an idea of what people have done in the recent past or what they plan to do going forward, so super
I'll
helpful.
I'll make one more comment. I do know that in the real estate market, there's a ton of data providers and a lot of market data available that maybe you can purchase, put in some sort of data lake, and try to use some of that information. Again, I'm not telling you what to do because I have no idea, but I just know that from a sales perspective, that's what you used to tell people because there are specific industries that are kind of like more contained, and real estate is one of those in which a lot of the information is out there because it's the same information, and some of the information is actually shared with some of the platforms because of the MLS and all those other things that are consistent throughout. So again, not an expert, but real world experience from a sales guy.
Awesome, thank you.
And to give you a couple more examples, when you're setting up your opportunity sales process, right? And you do your stages for new, in progress, and negotiation, close won, close lost, right? What kind of variable is that? It's a name, right? So it's going to be qualitative. And you can order it, but you might need some business knowledge to know the order to go in. New and close is pretty easy, but sometimes the ones in the middle, depending how you name them, it's not intuitive which ones come first because sometimes people have very strong back office processes that influence those stage names. And it might be confusing why in progress is different than in negotiation or in approvals, right? In approvals, because you're getting the contract approved before you negotiate it, or you've agreed on the negotiation. Now you're getting like you don't know perhaps where that goes, right? But either way, a stage, opportunity stage, is going to be a qualitative variable, and that would help you if you want to do analysis on your data, right? Where is this on the pipeline? How likely is it's going to close in the next 90 days? Well, depending on your opportunity stage, if it's in close negotiation, you're probably going to close in the next 30 days. If it's new, whatever your sales cycle is going to take, right? If it's 6 months or 2 years, that's your timeline. So definitely it affects your data model. For quantitative variables, are you guys familiar with, there's a guy called Steve Moe. Do you guys know who he is? No? Okay, that's fascinating. So Steve, for the longest time, he did not have any certifications, and he has spoken at Dreamforce, I don't know, 10 times, maybe every year. I don't know. He's a hoot. And it doesn't matter now, but this is how long I've been in Salesforce. He created what's called the power of one. And the power of one is you would put a field in your object, whatever it was, and it would be a formula field, and it equaled one. It always equaled one because you would use that field in your reports to be able to count those records and be able to do different things with them. Well, eventually, thank God, Salesforce added that count feature to reports. So now you don't need it. But for like, I don't know, 15 years, you needed Steve's power of one formula because otherwise you couldn't do a whole lot with Salesforce reports to count records, which is always infuriating. But the reason I bring up reports is because usually when people are implementing a system, they don't ask, how do you report on this? Because they think reporting comes later. I don't have to worry about it. If you don't put in the attributes, those quantitative variables in the beginning, when you go to build a report, guess what? They don't exist. And so if you want to know how many opportunities are associated to an account, did you do a roll-up field to count that there are 5 opportunities? And do you want to know which ones are won, which ones are lost, right? So those reporting requirements are usually very impactful to your data model. And they are going to be both of these qualitative and quantitative. You know, how do you segment your data and how do you want to count some average or data, and even something like a minimum and a max date. You want to know your oldest opportunity, your newest opportunity. Those are also going to be quantitative. So hopefully that helped, David.
And David, one more thing that comes to my, sorry, Marlene, but I was thinking about
Go
this.
for it.
It's we always think sales in a progressive way, right? But in real estate, you go into this loop of made an
Yeah.
offer, waiting for offer to be approved. So maybe you're going back one step, but that doesn't mean that you lost it. It means that just went back one step and then forward. A lot of times I see people using Salesforce in that linear way because that's the standard. But if your industry is different, adapt it to your industry and then create those intermediate states or ways in that you can go back and not necessarily close it and reopen the opportunity. Because then your data is skewed because now you got an open opportunity, a lost opportunity, a reopened opportunity, when in reality it was always the same opportunity all along.
That's really helpful. Thank you for that, Gil.
A good example of a continuous attribute for sales or for cases is the time it takes to close a deal or to close a case, right? Because that number is not always exact. We can say that the average life sales cycle is going to be 2 months, but some deals close in a month and some deals close in 6 months. It's just 2 months happens to be your average or your continuous. But that continuous, when you're looking at that, you can't just show one number. And so we'll talk about some of those reporting. So again, depending on your data model, all of these variables apply. Okay. So I didn't spend a lot of time on, and please tell me if when you want to talk about this some more, on what I would call, let me go back, what I would call the, well, it's funny, my button is hidden. So on discrete variables, so the number of opportunities by stage, the number of opportunities by product type. I didn't spend a lot on that kind of reporting because that's discrete. And so that tends to be a bar chart or a pie chart. And those tend to be percentages and they tend to be fairly straightforward to look at. I did spend time on continuous reporting because to me it was a little bit more complex. If you have any questions about the discrete reporting when it comes to how do I show the number of opportunities by segment, we can talk about it. So let's talk about continuous first, and then you can let me know what questions you have. So for continuous, there are special types of visuals that you want to use when you're showing the data. It tends to, you don't want to look at a list of decimals to see how much time it takes you to close a case. Maybe the goal is 5 minutes, but you can go from 5 minutes to 3 weeks, and everything in between has those timings, right? So it's a little bit harder to look at that. So they have two visuals that are meant to help us look at data. One of them is called a histogram. And the way a histogram works is it takes all of your data points and it creates equal size groups or bins to display them. So if you have from 0 to 1 is your range, just to keep it easy, you might create 4 bin sizes. 0 to a quarter to half, half to 0.75, and 0.75 to 1, right? Because now you want those bins to be equal. And then you're going to put how many fall into that category because you don't want to put, again, each individual item in there. You're going to be using the average of your results, comparing it to the median because your average might be skewed by outliers. If you have almost every cases get closed in 5 minutes, but you have 5% of cases get closed in 2 weeks, your average is still going to look like it's 5 minutes because it's affecting the data, right? Your median is really going to be that middle point to say really and truly what is that number that it's going to, where is the medium of all of the data? It's going to help you see if either your data is equal, and so that's the symmetrical type, or it can identify either a low outlier or a high outlier, and those are called skews. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. The second type of visual is called a box plot. And the box plot is going to group half of the data in the middle because basically it's going to say half of the data is, let's call it average, for lack of a better word. That's the way that I understand it. And while it's important, it's not really what we want to look at right now. What we want to look at is what is the closest high value and what is the closest low value. And so that's the upper and lower limits. And those are called whiskers. No idea why they're called whiskers, by the way. I don't know. I didn't dig into why they were calling this. If my dog howls, I'm going to go and mute in a second. And
I would like to think that they're called whiskers because they're just coming out like an
That's
animal with whiskers.
That's exactly what I was thinking, because whiskers used to be longer than the face. So yes, I thought of the same thing. Elisa, we're thinking alike.
So you're saying the person that came up with this had a cat, huh?
Yep.
And thank you for your patience. And so those outliers are going to be things that fall beyond the whiskers, right? So if you ever cut a whiskers from a cat just on one side, they're going to bump against walls because the whiskers is how they can tell the size of their body. And so that's how they navigate the world, right? And so those outliers are going to fall outside of those whiskers. Let's look at some examples. So we'll start with the histogram. There are 3 types like I talked about earlier. And I'm going to start with the middle one because I think for me it's easier to understand. So symmetrical means basically your data falls equally. And so both your average and median are equal. And even though your number of records in each bin might be different, it's still, there's no massive outliers. It's equal and you don't have a lot of disparate values that you need to worry about. And then we're going to talk about the negative or the left skew. And so this one means that you have from your median and average, you have outliers that are pretty far from that. And so that's why it's called a negative or a left skew. And that might be, again, going back to cases. You have some cases that get closed in seconds, and those are going to be beyond that. And then you can go, oh, we have cases that get automatically closed. So those are outliers that I can ignore. Or you might have, and by the way, sorry, for the left skew, the median is going to be greater than the average because the average is being pulled down by those outliers, right? Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. And then we'll talk about positive, which is going to be the median is going to be less than the average because there are significant outliers that are pulling the average up. So if you look at all of the people in the country that have 401ks, my husband just told me this yesterday. He said there's like 350,000 people that have more than $1 million in their 401k, which is a whole lot of money. But that's not a whole lot of people when you think about the population in the country, right? But $1 million is a ton of money. But those people would skew when you look at 401ks. What is the average 401k somebody's has saved for retirement? They're going to skew it because there are those people that have a whole lot of money. So that might skew it that way. Or if you look at billionaires, right? There's not that many billionaires in the US. There's a lot more than there used to be, but they're still going to skew our income, our net worth, because they're so far out to the positive side that they're going to move the number over. Questions or comments?
This is very counterintuitive to me because of how the graph is.
Yeah.
So I'll just have to. I mean, this is
Yeah.
definitely a flashback to my statistics class in college.
Yeah. And my guess is that this does not matter for the certification, for the associate certification, but I found it very interesting because I normally don't look at this kind of data this way, right? I look at the average handle time for a case, the average time to close it, and I haven't done this kind of analysis too, but it'd be interesting to say, what are my outliers? And what is my true average time to close a case when I remove those outliers of the cases that get closed when they're opened, and when I remove the ones that stayed open either because the agent forgot to close them or something happened, right? If I remove that, what is my true number? I've never looked at it that way.
I've never seen that comparison between average and median, and I think it's phenomenal because it gives you a real visual number of how the behavior, again, in the past, to predict and to prescribe, right? So to me, it's interesting, and I've been in different industries like call centers and sales, and again, you always get those type of behaviors, and even in service, and this is a great way of looking at, if you're trying to build something for the future, that's your better predictive and prescriptive way, by taking some of those out. But then again, you don't want to take it completely out because then you're not going to be able to service it, or you're not going to put enough of whatever capability to do so. So it's very interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and that's a good call out because then are your outliers going to be influencing your model and influencing your AI? My dog's going to howl again. Feel free to keep talking. I'll be right back again.
Maybe within your industry, this would be a cash sale that will skew up your numbers when somebody comes in, pays cash, and closes real quickly.
I agree. We haven't used anything like this in the past, but it's something that we can definitely look into. So I'm glad Marlene brought it up.
Yeah, these are definitely eye openers. And you would think that something talking AI would not go into this kind of deep data analysis, but it is. And again, it goes back to that article that I read that last week, and I didn't, it went right over my head because it was about data cloud, and I only know like this much. But this person was saying that data cloud, yes, it is a Salesforce product. Yes, it is expensive, but it takes away a lot of the guessing game when establishing the data parameters and integrity that you need in order for Salesforce to function. And then, I coupled it with a comment that I read the other day too, that yes, Salesforce is expensive, but it saves you money if you use it right. Right. So I think that that's always the paradigm internally in companies, versus Salesforce and spending the money and then putting the resources to do it right. Is that a boy or a girl, Marlene? Marlene brought the secret weapon to counter Luciano's daughter. Still unmute, Marlene.
Yeah.
How about now?
Much better.
Double mute. Thank you. So hopefully the dinosaur will keep Cadbury from howling again. So let's talk about box plot example. And so this one to me was really interesting as well because it's grouping your middle data from 25 to 75% in the middle. And it's saying, right now, we're going to look at what's happening outside of that. Let's call it average data, but it's not really average, right? It's just clumping everything in the middle. These are the whiskers. The whisker goes to the nearest level of the upper outlier and to the lower outlier. And then your outliers go beyond the whiskers. The idea is for you to see if there's a certain population or quantity that are outliers, and is it just one or two records, or is it a grouping that's moving you one way or the other? Go back to those 350,000 people that have $1 million in 401k, bless them. That's going to be a small cluster up here at the top because they have so much money, when the average person, I think it's something like 68,000. I forget the exact number. Most of us live in this middle box here in the middle. But this box plot is a little bit different way to look at data. And do you guys, which do you think is more efficient to look at continuous data, the histogram or the box plot visual?
I would say histogram. Just because it has like the skews and the average and the median.
Anybody else?
I think the box is just a deeper dive of the histogram. I think that at first glance I would use histogram, but I think this one gives you more detail of what's happening.
Yeah, especially because there can be so much more variance in continuous data.
And the reason I ask is because part of the trailhead was to show you, and what I think is funny is both of the screenshots are from the trailhead. The first one was standing up, right? So it was up, and then it shows you here 3 box diagrams that are sideways. And so the point that they had is the box plots take up less room and you can compare data quicker and faster than the histogram. I thought it was a little confusing to show me the box plot in one direction and then flip it. But from the trailhead, it's more space saving, and it does show you a lot of data very quickly, right? What I think is interesting about this is you'll see the whiskers have some outliers inside of them as well as outside of them, right? And so it was just interesting to see it. I think both have their uses, and I think if you're looking at outliers, the box plot is very useful. If you're looking at distribution of how your data goes, I think the histogram is better. So I think I thought it was an interesting comment on their side, but yes, it's more space efficient, but I think each one has its purpose.
I see why they call them whiskers now. It makes sense. When it's horizontal that way, I totally get it.
Yeah, because the whole body of the cat, right? It's like that's where your wall is going to be. So yeah,
Mhm.
or where your wall is not going to be. All right, so let's keep talking about data quality. So what is going to be some things that are going to cause your data to not be ready for AI? So common data issues are going to be you have missing records. You either have incomplete data sets, maybe you have duplicate data. Maybe you thought that you're going to give your AI your source data and your data from your business intelligence data warehouse. Well, now you have two sets of the data. So you need to make sure you understand the data you're feeding into it, because you might be duplicating data from different data sources, or you might have duplicates in your data. If you don't have good data standards, if you have inconsistent naming conventions, formats. So if anybody here is from Europe, the way you show dates is different, right? It's not month, day, year. It's day, month, year. That freaked me out one time. Actually, it made me have to rebook an airline ticket because I had booked the wrong trip for my bus tour. I thought I was going to do the bus tour on May 5th. I'm sorry, May 6th, and it was the wrong month, right? Because I had flipped the dates. And so make sure your data is, you understand and you have agreement on a date is set to whatever it is. Is it year, month, day, and how are you going to store that data in the database and how you're going to display it. That's a very frequent complaint with Salesforce because localization will do that for you. But if I'm doing that with Apex, I have to do a whole bunch of extra work to make sure I'm taking localization into account for it. Incomplete records, if you have missing information, obviously your AI is not going to be able to take really good action on that. And if your data is stale, if you have outdated information or maybe just doesn't apply anymore, what we were going through in 2020 is very different from what we're going now in 2025. And data dimensions that you want to look at to see how good your data is. How old is the data? Does it still apply now? Completeness, accuracy, is it correct or not? Sometimes when data moves from one system to another, there are either misunderstandings or mistakes made in transferring that data to the new system. You also want to make sure that it's consistent, again, going back to formats, eliminate duplicates or tie them with some key so you know that there's a duplicate. And also, how is your data being used? Because you want to make sure that it's being used in the proper way. Let's go on to the next slide. And these were interesting because it's basically preparing your data for AI. I want to look at this a little bit more. There was one link to a data quality dimension. And let me find it over here. And the slides, you're going to have a link to the record. And I know you guys probably can't read it there, so we're going to go into the actual document, to the PDF, and we're going to look at this a whole lot bigger. And so this just had really good visuals, and I didn't feel like reproducing them in the slides. It didn't make sense. The completeness is pretty basic, right? Are you missing some important information on your record or not? But here's an example of you don't have somebody's name. Maybe it got corrupted. Maybe it was an email subscription, so you just have their email but not their name. So there's data that's missing. Is the data valid? Is there a way that you can compare it to something else to say, oh, that data got corrupted, I should not use it? Let me go up here. So here is customer birth date. Did somebody key in their birth date? I am terrible about this. I don't know if you guys saw this about our social security system or not. They're saying that there's people that are over 300 years old and we have vampires and all that stuff, which I think is a hoot. I always enter my birth date when I'm doing something online as 1/1/1900. If it's not something official, I would give Social Security Administration my actual birthday. But for anything else, if somebody asks me how old you are, I always give them 1/1/1900. just because I think it's amusing and I do have that little bit of sarcasm in me. But I know I'm giving things really bad data. Whenever they ask me for my salary, I always pick the very first amount, which is 0 to whatever, 25,000, right? One time I did a search on myself to see what like Equifax knew about me. It has my salary as $30,000 a year. I'm like, that's fantastic. Like, you don't need to know what I actually make. It's private information. I will choose to tell you when I have that information. But anyway, validity, right? Where is your data coming from? Did somebody look at somebody's driver's license to validate their birth date, or is it manually entered and perhaps transcribed from month and the day? And so just make sure that the data is as valid as you can. Of course, unique, you want to make sure that you're getting unique data. This is a pretty easy example of Robert Brown, Robert Brown. In my system, I will have Robert J. Brown. Same person, just one of them has the middle initial, the other one doesn't. And so technically they're both unique, but they are different, right? So it's just an interesting challenge that we have. How old your data is, timeliness, and some of this also had to do with whether your data made it to the system it's supposed to be in at the right time. So this is talking about, does your AI have the data into the system as it's supposed to? A lot of times we're not doing real-time data transfers and we're doing batches, going back to data cloud that Gil you mentioned. It can do both. Batch tends to be cheaper because it doesn't use as many resources, but is it meeting your SLA? Is your data valid for today or was it valid for yesterday? We talked about that one. Consistency, is your data going to be able to, going back to things like, and sorry, my computer's in my way, my own way here. And so here we have, is the data from the source system the same as your target system? So I have, we've been doing a sync between two systems in Salesforce where we found out that we're missing 1 million records. That's a decent amount of numbers. And we've done a couple of data syncs to make sure they move over to the system. And just to make sure that they're aligned because they should be in sync. And so that's consistency example of, and Salesforce is the system that's being used by other systems to pull this data. And so I was missing 1 million records. That's a problem. We have fixed it, but you want to make sure that your data is moving the way it should across different places. Any questions on any of those? Sound good? All right. Let's go back here. Let's go to our next slide. And so let's talk about data cleaning and data transformation, because David, you just talked about you're going to be responsible for doing this kind of thing, right? And how do you make sure that you're doing that properly is a big question. So when you're looking to clean data, I talked about California versus Canada because it keeps tripping me up. Just did it again yesterday. But fixing incorrect data. One of my old jobs, they used to store the country in the state field. Don't ask why. But if you weren't domestic, they would store Canada in the state field. And I'm like, that just caused so many problems. If you loaded data into an Excel document, and then this has happened in plenty of Salesforce orgs, you use data loader to load the data, and now you have scientific notation for a number, and you corrupted the data, right? So you want to make sure the data is correct. Fixing NA versus not applicable. But this one really matters for consistency. As long as you have one or the other and you're consistent, you should be fine and your models will understand it. But if you have both too, the models can read it differently. Remove duplicates, remove incomplete data. Sorry. Remove incomplete data and remove outlier data. If you had a fire sale, if you guys haven't heard, I work for Hertz and we had a fire sale when it comes to EV cars. And so we're not going to want to use those EV prices to guide our car price models moving forward, because that would not, it's a different model, it's a different time. There was a very valid reason why we sold those cars as cheap as we did. And we're not going to continue that with our regular gas powered cars. When you're looking at data transformation, because maybe you don't have all of those quantitative and qualitative data that you need, you might be transforming data to either convert it to the correct format, just because you know March 1st should be in a database stored as, this is a string, March 1st, and then this is a date, and you want to be able to store date fields as dates. Maybe you're converting raw data into individual attributes. A lot of data gets stored into a label, a colon, and then the value. And then there's like a list of 5 of those. That's a JSON structure. You want to split those out into different values. And you also want to be able to map multiple sources into one unified source when you're doing the data transformation. Data transformation can also add qualitative attributes. So it can say whether this is a leisure or business trip. Maybe in your source data, it's a 1 and a 2. 1 and 2 is not all meaningful, but we're going to go ahead and convert that data to something that you can actually segment by, and both a human and an AI model can understand leisure versus business and not need a mapping document to know what 1 and 2 mean. Questions or comments?
In the case of data cloud, would that be done before you put it into data cloud? All that data transformation needs to happen before you put it into the data cloud model?
So I love that I don't work for Salesforce, so I can answer this honestly. You can do it both before or inside Data Cloud. If you do it in Data Cloud, it's going to cost you a whole lot more because it's going
That's
to
what I thought.
consume more
Yeah.
credits. So if you can clean and prep your data as much as possible before, it's going to be better. It will save you a lot of money.
Yeah, when I used to work at the implementation partner, we were not fans of data cloud, but anyway, that's neither here or there.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I was evaluating Data Cloud, because we're so guilty of all of the bad things that you shouldn't do, or the incorrect data, incomplete, duplicates, inconsistent format. Like, unfortunately, agents and brokers, their data, because we get it from the LSCs, right? That's the source of action. They're the source of truth, and they send us all kinds of bad data. But when we were evaluating Data Cloud, they said that exact thing: clean it up before you put it in there, because it's going to be way more expensive to do it in Data Cloud, because we just have all kinds of inconsistencies in the data.
That's great. I like Data Cloud for its functionality and its features. I'm not at all a fan of its pricing model. And so I think if you can get the right negotiated prices, I think it could be amazing for your org, and it does a lot of great things. But there's also competitors out there, so it's good to evaluate multiple options.
Absolutely.
And I think it's fully dependent on how deep you are into your Salesforce, into your organization, whether you're only using for CRM or for other functions, versus if you're a big company and you have a deep ERP program that controls all the back end, then more than likely a lot of that data is going to live somewhere else that makes no sense to be brought into Salesforce and then brought into Data Cloud. So again, that's why there's so many different models, but the principles are sound and are the same throughout. Understanding the principles, I think, is the key.
Agreed. This was not in the trailhead, but it was one of the pages, and I thought it was really great. So let's look at this one as well for data cleaning checklist. And so very similar to the other one, right? It's going to give you the item that you're going to do, examples, and potential solutions. And so here we have ensuring that your columns have the correct data type before beginning analysis. And that's where this is a great example. The currency got stored as a string, so as text, instead of a number. And so you can't do any of the math type functions because David is smiling. And this is very common. Another one here, I think, would also be currency. You're assuming everything is US, but it's not, right? If you're a global company. So, or if people are making payments through different currencies. Data range constraints. If you're doing an NPS score or a GPA here, it should be 0 to 10 for NPS, and GPA, depending on your school, would be from 0 to 4. Some of them are 0 to 5, but 5.1 would not be a valid number. And so you want to make sure that you're looking at data that's just wrong and then taking action whether you're going to remove it, or if you have a source, a trusted source, that you can actually update it with the right information. We talked about uniqueness before, right? How can you make sure that you have the right person? This person has 2 heights. Either it was taken at 2 different times and they have shrunk, because that is possible, or one of these is wrong. And this one is challenging because how do you know which one to keep? You can make business rules to say, well, keep the oldest one or the newest one, but that's really not a whole lot you can do other than that. But and there's a lot more ways that you can have duplicates data. Let's talk about text and categories. So here, again, the values, city, New York versus New York City. And this one is a whole lot easier to put business rules around to say, no, let's go ahead and actually, when we know the zip code, we're going to go use a process to populate the proper city based on another data source that can give me the city from the zip code. I would not use area code for phone number because people move and they port their numbers now. And a long time ago, you used to be able to use that as a informational tool, but it hasn't been valid for quite a while now. If the number of numbers in the phone number is wrong for the location, you would want to look at that. There's actually some really great services that let you know from the area code if it's a valid number or if somebody put in a fake number. I also put in fake numbers when I put in forms, by the way. I like to give my phone number to people. And of course, again, going back to formatting, we have in our, because of Salesforce, the way that we do it, we always do country code and then the phone number. That's what we do in our particular CRM. But I've seen all sorts of different things. I've also seen it where somebody puts in different fields for different formats because different systems need a different format, right? And so there's different things you can do with it. But ideally, your main source of the data should have a consistent format. So your phone number should always be formatted in a particular way. I think it's funny they think this is wrong. This does have spaces in it. But again, my phone numbers always start with area code. If they don't start with an area code, we throw an error. But we have the rule and we're consistent about it. Uniformity. This is a good example, right? Celsius versus Fahrenheit. I have a lot of friends that aren't in the States, so I'm always doing a conversion when we're talking about how cold or hot it is in the local regions. Your data needs to be consistent, just to make sure that you're not going to have these outliers that are not outliers. They're just the wrong value. We talked about dates, the whole day, month, year, month, day, year. That's very common. Just be aware of it. And it's very interesting when you're working with a global team because they'll tell you, oh, the record is 05/06, 2025. I'm not sure what date they mean when I'm talking to people in England. So we agree to say the name versus just the dates. You want to make sure that you have validated things like the math. It looks like this was just transformed or doing an ETL process, the wrong value came over. Maybe you had the wrong math. You were subtracting instead of adding, right? And so you want to make sure your data is correct. And again, make sure that you can do some validation. How old is somebody based on their year? You can do that math pretty easy and see if your data is correct or not. For missing data, I think it's interesting if you decide to either populate the data because you can make certain assumptions, or if you're going to get it from a different source, or if you're going to leave it null. But I think it's interesting that you consider how you address missing data. Do you guys have examples? How have you dealt with missing data? I haven't done a whole lot of this.
Depending on the field, I had to do this recently. We were moving from Dynamics to CRM, or I'm sorry, Dynamics to Salesforce. And we have a lot of holes in our data for a myriad of different reasons. And a lot of times, like if it was a GUID, it was for the empty GUID or empty string or email address that wasn't a real address, just to fill it in because we wanted a complete data set as we moved stuff to Salesforce. And it's hard. And I was thinking about while you were talking, Marlene, about putting that validation upon input. Because it's like humans making errors when they put data in. Because again, as I mentioned, we're getting our data from realtor associations, and they may misspell somebody's name or misspell their email address or something, and we won't know. And if we update it in our current CRM system, if we get another record from the LSC, it's just going to overwrite it. So that's how we've dealt with holes in our data in the most recent past.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Any other comments from anybody or questions?
My organization, we do financial counseling. And so one of our metrics is to save at least 1 week's worth of income for the future. But we can't establish that goal if we don't know what their income is. So when we realized that a lot of people were trying to track this metric but didn't have income, and they were telling us how much they were saving, what we realized is that we had to delete those other metrics. So if you don't have income, our calculations were going all wonky. So we had to delete responses for that metric because they weren't ever going to calculate properly. So sometimes it's thinking about the dependencies of what that missing data, what dependencies there are on that missing data and what other data you have to remove because it'll be wonky.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Anybody else have any other examples? Sounds good. I know I have a friend who recently they were looking at their medical chart and somebody put in something that their doctor had not talked about. And so they got very worried because once you put it into somebody's medical chart, it gets populated to so many other areas, right? So they got it fixed, but we can't begin to know if it was not put into the central hospital system and all the other places. So it's challenging. So, because now his record might look like it's got missing data because it got removed, but really it was wrong. So it's corrected data. But so anyway, I thought this was very useful. So hopefully that you guys find that useful as well. And let's see. Back over here. And so whatever you're doing, and if you can do this at the onset of a project, if you have a data management plan, you really want to be able to address your data problems before it becomes ugly, dirty data, especially if you're moving from one system to another. You want to make sure you have agreed upon, published naming conventions, formatting rules, because that way people can use them and follow them. Make sure you have agreement on workflow processes, because that way people know how the data is moving from one system to another, maybe how it's being transformed and how it's changing. Have data quality metrics. So we're about to add a completeness score to our customer profiles, because if we don't have certain attributes, we want the different touch points that we have with the customer to try to get that information. We're probably going to give you a $30, $40, $50,000 asset, the car, to go rent. We need a full customer profile when you walk out the door, right? We can't do that without a driver's license. And that's very systematic, but there are other things that we can enrich our profiles with our company. Make sure you know who owns the data. This is usually very tricky because you usually have IT and business and different partners that might either want the data or maybe nobody wants to own it. And they go, no, it's not mine. It's somebody else's problem. And so, but if you have the role of who owns the quality, the things like, are you backing up the data? Are you able to restore it? It helps having that person to say, yes, here's how we're going to treat our data and how we're going to move forward with it. Make sure, of course, you have proper security and permissions around your data, because that way not everybody can see and do everything to it. While you might trust every single person in your company, if you have a breach, now that person that stole your data now has a problem. A few months ago, my legal team reached out to me because one of our vendors had a breach and they have a connection into Salesforce. And so they were asking me a whole bunch of questions about the integration, how we're doing things. And I was able to, with full confidence, say, yes, I have access. Here's their username. They can only see 2 fields in our system. And this is everything they've been logging in for the past, with the window that they had the breach. And so my security and legal team came back and said, we're in the clear. Even if they took something, it doesn't matter. It's anonymous data. It's really their problem and we don't have to worry about it. That was great. And so that was because we took the time when we did that integration to only give the proper permissions to that integration user. And your data, always think of your human users, your third-party human users as well, and your integrations, because you need to make sure that that's proper. For AI, it's really challenging because AI right now is getting access to everything. And so it's just something to consider and know, what does that mean? Where is my data going? And just making sure that you're at least agreeing and following whatever your company standards are and not breaking out of those policies. Because otherwise your AI is not going to be intelligent, but you need to make sure people understand that. Of course, monitor it and maintain it. We were talking about SLAs earlier. Did the data move from your source system to your AI data sources in time? Is it, or maybe we have a process that checks not only did we get records, but how many records we got. Because if we didn't get any records for the past 3 days, we got a file, something went wrong. And so we go chase that particular process. Of course, in Salesforce, we have lots of tools we can use to help your data management. You have required fields, because that way your folks can't enter data without that information that's vital to your process, validation rules for things like formatting, or maybe you can only add a particular option if you have another option, right? Those validation rules are really important. Use flows. So one of the things that we did last year is we have the agent entering some of the information, and from that information, we fill in about 40% of the record for them based on that, because that's used for metrics and reporting and tracking and the outbound API calls that the agent doesn't need to enter, but the flow now does it for them, saves them time, the data is more accurate, and the API calls are more successful. So make sure you automate as much as you can to reduce those manual errors. And of course, have duplicate management. Salesforce has duplicate management on the system itself. My experience with it is that it works unless you have a lot of data. And so I think if you're somewhere around 1 to 2 million records you're trying to dedupe, it works okay. Anything beyond that, it's going to hit limit and it's not going to function very well. So just look at other options that you might want to use to identify those duplicates. Is there anything else you guys have used for your data management plan? Do you guys have a data management plan? Does it work for you, or is it something that you'd want to implement?
Well, where I'm at, we definitely need one. One of the complaints that we hear a lot from our sales organization is data quality, and yet they push back on required fields. So we're trying to figure out how to walk that tightrope, so to speak. And I was wondering, I mean, other than just, a stick approach, carrot versus stick. I mean, other than a stick approach, how do we, how do we require the fields? I mean, I know how to make fields required. I mean, that's not the point. The point is how do we respond to the pushback that this one group of users that I'm thinking of is going to make when we make a whole bunch of pick list fields required before they can convert the lead.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Mark,
Anybody have any ideas?
Representing the salespeople in this call, which is probably one of the few or the one, I would say, I think the issue is always that salespeople not necessarily love pick lists because we feel that they don't account for all the possible real variables out there. And on the flip side of that, I think it's also got to do with the fact that when somebody decides to create a pick list, the real salespeople are not consulted. Somebody else in some other department is. And I think usually the issue is that those fields are usually determined by finance or somebody else, and not really the sales teams from the sales manager down. So the people that are really on the field. So I think it's more of a communication issue at the end. And pick lists are not necessarily the solution. I think the solution is making sure that there is a standardized process, even if you're typing it yourself, but that we all use the same wording and the naming conventions, and then we require format for the fields. I'm not a lover of pick lists. I know that they reduce human error. I'm more of a fan of creating standardization and then also truly involving the sales team in those processes and not finance or legal or some other department to make decisions for sales, because that's when then your sales adoption goes completely down.
Okay.
Good point.
Yep. Good points.
I would add, go ahead, Gil.
No, I was going to say that's all I know, sales.
Yeah, I would add that. So what Gil is saying is bring those salespeople into the conversation and figure out, because it's like it sounded like the question is, they're complaining about the quality of the data, but they don't want to help you maintain the quality of the data. And to me, I would approach that as showing the benefit of, okay, if you want better quality data, let's work together to figure out a process to where sales is involved. They understand, what values they're going to put in, and then you can help them reach that goal. It's like you have to make it plain to them the benefit of instituting some type of process. It's hard to do But otherwise, you're just going to keep butting heads with them about, well, we have bad data, but don't want to do anything to fix it. If it's, well, if we implement X and this will fix the data and it's not going to make it more difficult or impede your ability to sales, it may actually increase your sales, right? You show them the benefits and have that conversation. Maybe you can collaborate.
Okay.
You know, I have a different perspective, and I have led sales effectiveness in many firms. So I'm kind of in the middle of both business and IT, sales IT. Some of the challenges which I faced, salespeople and business and IT and business. A lot of salespeople, they don't enter accurate information just because they don't want company to know everything. So the challenge, sometimes, you do pick list and some of these things so that you can at least push them to enter as accurate as possible. So again, it's sometimes there are challenges which are not visible, not said, but they are there.
Yep. Well, I kind of like pick lists because in my mind they're faster for a person to complete rather than a free form text. But we also, so we have a group of 8 inside salespeople that are calling prospects, and they're really good at using log a call, and they put all their notes in the comment section of log a call, which is what it was intended to do, when they created log a call. The problem is all that information is buried in a text field in a related list, and it's not, we can't use it. Well, the first thing that right now, I mean, we can't use any of that information in lead scoring, so that's what that's what ultimately we want to be able to do. Is there's 10 qualifying questions of that are just yes, no, they're not yes, no, they're pick lists that have different values in them. And those 10 values, those 10 pick lists are going to be big drivers of how the lead score is computed by Einstein. But if those fields aren't populated, it diminishes the value of the lead score. So that's what I'm trying to figure out how to do in a practical way where, they'll do it. They may not be thrilled about having to use those fields because right now they're just optional. And I don't know if you folks realize this, but it's been my experience that optional fields are rarely populated. It's like unless it's going to be required either through a page layout or through a validation rule, why bother having it? I mean, it's like it's not going to get filled in consistently, So
you need to tie your compensation to that behavior. You need to make sure that the leads are properly filled in from a sales perspective, completeness and cleanliness, and use that as part of your compensation, because compensation is what drives behaviors in sales.
I think another option that you can look at might be using AI. So we're looking at a new CTI product for the call center. And one of the options that we have is we need to do quality assurance for our calls. And the QA process has like 10 questions on it. And what we have drafted out right now is 8 of those questions can be answered by AI. The call center is going to be doing transcription of the call and things like, did the agent greet the customer by their name? Did the agent greet the customer by their loyalty level? Did the agent thank the customer at the end? Like those things, AI can do no problem. And so we're going to take the approach of 80% of the QA will be done by the transcription of the AI. 2 of those questions require a human to handle, right? Did the agent show empathy to the customer? Did the agent understand the issue that the customer had? Because we do have call centers from around the world. We have some cultural differences, right? And so we don't want the customers to feel like they weren't understood, and those questions would be done by a human. So, Mark, I don't know if any of those checkboxes are transferable to a transcription type thing of yes, they've done these things, and that way you only leave the ones that have to have a human involved to do it, right? Even likelihood to buy, the sentiment of the call, that's AI. Of course, there's cost to it. But I think that's where the question comes in. Are we going to do a pilot and say we're going to run 1,000 of these through AI, see how AI does, see how the human does? Does it improve that lead score, and does it improve your sales process, right? And I think that's where the power of AI comes in. And this does not have to be Salesforce. Again, I don't work for Salesforce. I can say all this. You can use the Amazon Lexbots. You can use, there's a whole bunch of vendors out there that are doing this kind of analysis, and you can connect it to Salesforce. Salesforce wants you to use Agentforce, and it's got some pretty nifty tools, but it's up to you to decide what works best for your company. Just ideas.
Thank you all.
Yeah. All right. So that brings us to Tableau. And so a lot of the data literacy modules we looked at this week for this class really were Tableau features and products, which is great. But for me, any business intelligence tool should be able to get these things done. From a Salesforce perspective, because this might be in the certification, I have no idea, you do want to know what it's capable of doing with Tableau. And so these are the products that they showed in one of the modules. They have Tableau Desktop, which is going to be where you do all of your creating of your data. You might be importing it. You're going to publish data sources. You're going to create your visualizations. You're going to analyze it, and you're going to hopefully use that to make something actionable. You're going to publish that to the Tableau server. Tableau server is web-based and customer hosted platform, so it's going to be on-prem. And so if you want all your data to stay in your internal system, that's Tableau server. If you're using Tableau Cloud, you'll be able to push those results from your analysis into Tableau Cloud. It works exactly as server, but it's hosted by Salesforce or Tableau in AWS and not on your own system. That's going to be all of your paid pieces, but then you have your Tableau public, because Salesforce wants you to be doing things like go download that census data and what can you learn from it. There were a whole bunch of COVID dashboards that were created during the pandemic. It was being done through Tableau public because Salesforce wanted to both help the problem, but also, of course, it helps them from a company from a marketing perspective. But Tableau public is really great, and that comes with its own desktop public edition that you need to use to push it to Tableau public. And then Tableau mobile is part of the paid pieces, as far as I know. I'm not, the app itself is free, but you need to be able to have access to the data. I have never used Tableau. Anybody here? Have you used Tableau?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
We use it where I work.
Okay, that's awesome. And so I've used other business intelligence tools, and they have different features. MicroStrategy is one of them. MicroStrategy is a very interesting company for a whole slew of reasons, but they offer a lot of these same features. And once again, how we look at data, how we process data is really important, because just having the data isn't enough. This is again going back to Tableau. They did talk a little bit about challenges of being on-prem. You are going to have much higher infrastructure costs. I know my company moved a data center from being on-prem last year to being hosted on AWS because we wanted to be able to scale up and down. We wanted the redundancies, and we wanted to make sure that it was as secure as possible. So we moved from on-prem, and a lot of companies are doing that, to moving to the cloud. The advantages are that you really pay for what you need. If you're doing an AWS type model, you don't need to pay for something and buy 10 servers ahead of time because you might have a peak in 3 months. You can go at your current pace and just pay for peak times. It should be more cost effective because, again, you're just paying for what you're using and not for the whole thing. There is some, my opinion here is that the cost effectiveness is offset a little bit because you need people that understand that system, right? We have a whole bunch of AWS resources in our company. I've been working with them a lot. Personally, I'll be learning more about AWS later this year after we go through more AI modules, because I think AWS is really integrated to any company out there that wants that kind of cloud infrastructure. There's a couple other competitors, but AWS is definitely the leader. And of course, accessibility. One of the points they wanted to make is that because cloud lets you have a lower cost entry point, it makes it more available to more companies of any size. You don't have to be a huge enterprise to be able to do a lot of these analytics that used to be reserved for really large, massive companies that had the budgets. You can be a smaller company. You can just load the data that you want to review and then stop doing the process, because maybe you don't need to do the analysis 100% of the days of the year, right? Maybe you're going to do a pilot, do a 3-month analysis project, go off, and then do it again in 3 or 6 months, just to do a touch base and see how you're doing. Like, do a baseline and then compare to how you did in the baseline later. But definitely, depending on your company's needs, you may need to be on-prem because you have high security needs. Maybe you already have the infrastructure and the resources. It's not going to cost you anything extra, but the cloud advantages are pretty strong. Questions or comments?
Yeah, I agree with that because we're moving from on-prem to cloud, and it's just easier. There are concerns. I was reading something from a CIO newsletter about cloud costs going up and up, but that may just be because of compute or running certain processes or functions or something. But I think it's definitely the way to go because servers, they reach the end of life after 3 years. We invested and got some servers on-prem, and then it was a couple of years later we were already talking about, well, they're out of date and they need a lot of patching and this, that, and the other thing. So we're not using AWS as the only cloud provider, but we have a mix, right? We use Azure and AWS, but it definitely seems the way to go to start something new. And it's just worthwhile to be cognizant of the cost because the cloud costs can go up too, especially when you start talking about a lot of data. So
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because AWS does a very good job of being transparent at their cost. So you can sign up any service, and they have hundreds of services. Like, it's like 300 different modules you can be using, which is pretty great. And the cost is very low at, X cents per whatever transaction you're doing. But if you have an open wallet and you let it go up as high as it's going to go, and I think that's the other part of the cloud costs that people don't look at. If they don't put boundaries on how much they're willing to spend and they just let it run, it can become a very large bill. And like I said, if you use enough AWS resources, you're going to need AWS trained people. And of course, that skill set comes at a cost as well. And so I think apples to apples, it is more cost effective than on-prem. But it can run away with the costs very quickly.
because it's like I hear all the time, oh, we just spin up another server, it's fine, we can do it in 2 seconds, and then it's not until you get the bill that you get that sticker shock of, oh my, we have way more than we need.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's in function of how much business you're doing. And I think that the misconception with on-prem, which by the way, the cost of on-prem equipment continues to rise up even at the same rate or even higher than cloud.
True.
But I think that the key here is who's in the middle, because I think that a lot of what's happening out there in the real world, especially in the medium to small business segment, is there's a lot of providers in the middle that are the ones that are connected to AWS and Azure and all those others in order to provide certain bundle services. But I think that the multi-tenant model has taken over for sure, and that enables smaller businesses to take advantage of those technologies.
And Salesforce is in AWS, right?
Yep,
The
absolutely
cloud
it
is in the
is.
cloud.
It's funny when you learn that, like I used to tell everybody that in business people compete, but they not necessarily do anything by themselves. And the example of Samsung being chips being everywhere inside of even iPhones, people don't realize that there is no isolation. Companies need to work together, even if this in the background under a non-disclosure deal.
Exactly. All right, we're going to go to our second to last slide. Himanshu, do you want to go over this one? You're on mute.
I think I was in the mute, so sorry about that. So we all work on CRM. I've been working on CRM since 90s when we didn't have enough transactional data, but we were capturing the data. I remember working on Siebel, and so when you were talking on premises a few minutes back, and then I was thinking that yes, I remember that creating the BI portal and having a data warehouse and producing those reports and multiple servers and so on. So obviously, I think that CRM is foundational to AI because it helps us to capture all the front-end data, especially all the transactional data, ERP data, and then nowadays, marketing is part of broader CRM, and we also manage knowledge and communities and so on. So data is the backbone for all our AI, and we just talked about so much, and Marlin did so well, very deep dive on cleaning all data and so on. So I guess nothing much from my side beyond that. Uh, this slide is very self-explanatory. Marlin, any comments from anyone?
I
I
got a
think that
question for
slide.
you guys, data expert. How do you keep your data clean? Like if there's a cleanup process that constantly runs, or this run every single time, or we do it like Mark was saying, trying to prevent errors and put clean data from the beginning. What's your data maintenance policy? Yeah, we can call it that.
Yeah. Well, we have what we call import rules when we import data from our local service centers, or they're really realtors or associations, if you will. So we do have some rules to make sure like the real estate license is on there. There's a phone number. There's what we call an MLS ID, et cetera, et cetera. But it isn't as robust as it could be. But there are some rules in place. And then in the Dynamics worlds, we use what are called workflows and plugins to maintain data integrity, to maintain the relationships between like a broker, their offices, and then their associates in their offices. So there is some stuff in place, but it's hard when it's like, well, we know this is the wrong person. I think Marlene had the example where it was Jim Brown and Jim J. Brown, but it's the same person. And we have to allow duplicates because a broker can have multiple offices, so they need multiple MLS IDs. So there's some challenges there in terms of automation. But one of the things we instituted about a year and a half ago was just really looking at the data and surfacing it to the different departments in the organization to say, hey, we see these duplicates. And a lot of times what needs to happen is they need to contact LSE to say, okay, which one of these records do we need to keep? So we have a data maintenance plan, but in my opinion, it isn't as robust as it could be.
Anybody else? And so from my side, I think your data is never going to be pristine. And so you have to allow for a certain amount of error. It's just, there's no way to do it. What I think is interesting about this is every one of these sources probably needs to be cleaned up. And when you're putting it into a central place, and this is where data cloud or a tool like it really shines, right? You're going to put in each one of these arrows is going to go into something. It should be transformed. It should be cleaned, deduplicated before it centralizes to the AI data sources. And so that's also part of making sure that your data is clean, but also put in there, and that you don't clean the data and it's done. You have to have repeatable processes, and don't assume that because you're like David, I don't know if you're done moving or not from Dynamics to Salesforce, but it's not really a one-time thing. Yes, your data will be loaded at one time, but all of your data processes need to continue to run repeatable, documented, and you learn from something on each one. Right now, I have a process that million records I told you that was missing.
Mhm.
Somebody decided years ago that this is going to be a daily job. And so when that job runs, it sets that data to today was the date on, or if it got removed, today was the date removed. Now that we did the sync with a whole bunch of older records. Those dates are wrong.
Mhm.
I agree with you 1,000%. It is a daily thing, and part of the uphill, or part of the mountain I'm trying to climb, is that, hey, we need to do this on a regular basis. We can't wait annually and clean up a roster because it's time to start sending out invoices. We need to do this on a bi-weekly, monthly, or on a regular basis, because it's like cleaning your house. If you only do it once a year, it's a Herculean effort to do it, because we have so much that's accumulated, and that technical debt is a real issue for us.
And what I think is funny is what I know now, if I had set this process in place when I got started 5 years ago, I would not have assumed the date was today. I'm getting a data file from a source system. I would have said, give me the date from the source system because I'm already processing all the other data from it. And I will take your date because your date is a source of truth. So remember how we're talking about make sure data doesn't get corrupted? That's a great example of the data I have in Salesforce has been corrupted because of a bad assumption. And so anytime you're moving data, don't assume the current date. Make sure that you're putting a reason behind that. Did it really happen today? Because it happened in CRM? Great. Or it's coming from somewhere else and you need to take their data source as the truth and move forward with it.
And
All right.
sometimes, Merlene, that having that, maybe you need for whatever reason to adopt a new date, but then keep at least the old date as a reference field or a related field because it gives you context. And I tell people sometimes context is everything.
It's good. So before we go into our quiz, thank you. Thank you for coming today. I know it's Saturday. I know we have other things that we might want to be doing. Really enjoy the comments, the discussion, and love how we're interactive. So if you guys don't mind, I am going to take a quick screenshot of us and camera. So if you want to be off camera, go off camera. If you want to be on camera, please pop on. And then we're going to see Elisa's house. You're blurred. I'm teasing you.
We're getting
And
the tour.
yeah, let's do this side by side. All right, let me go get our screenshot. Ready? Smile.
Hey.
Thank you. You guys are awesome. And now I am going to stop recording our YouTube session.